Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining EPALE's next online discussion. I am Tamás Arangozó from the European Basic Skills Network, and I will be the moderator for this stream session today. We are happy to start the discussion with a half an hour online stream with two of our guests, which then is followed by a moderated EPALE discussion in the comment section. So you can feel free to participate, share your comments after the stream session, and we will address that with our experts. Today we are focusing on basic skills training and policy in prisons. And it is a great pleasure to welcome our guest experts today. We are here with Maria Toia from the Romanian Center for Promoting Lifelong Learning. Maria is a senior researcher, and she's going to talk about practical perspectives of training in prisons. Welcome, Maria.
Welcome, and thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to be here, and I look forward for an inspiring discussion.
Thank you for coming. And I would also like to welcome James King from the European Prison Education Association. James is the head of education at the Scottish Prison Service and also the secretary of EPALE, and he will address the policy level developments in prison education. And welcome, James, and thank you for joining us today.
Basic Skills Agency for making today possible. Thank you.
Before we start, we would like to encourage our audience to share their questions in the comment section as we move on with the online stream, and we are going to address them at the end. So James, first, I would like to turn to you to talk about a little bit about the generic policy level regarding prison education. Can you tell us a bit about your work with EPALE and Europris?
Yes, Thomas. In 2017, I was very honoured and privileged to be able to chair and lead a group of experts on prison education from 10 different jurisdictions in Europe on behalf of Europris and collaboration with the EPEA. The primary remit of the group was to revisit the 1989 recommendations on prison education that had been developed by the EPEA back in 1989, but which were now obviously 30 years old and required to be relevant to the contemporary world and to include things like ICT development, take cognizance of educational research, and to be aware of the research and development that's been undertaken in relation to learning difficulties and disabilities within the prison population.
That's very interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about this revision and maybe some of the highlights?
Absolutely. One of the things that we, the underpinning principles of the 1989 recommendations had already been established. There were still lots that were relevant within those recommendations. You know, the underpinning ethos, you know, the basic principles of education for all had been established in Europe as early as the 1950s. You know, and with the Council of Europe Convention establishing the right of education for all, that was subsequently developed by the United Nations, by European prison rules, and indeed by the Mandela rules, you know, establishing the fundamental right of people in prison to have access to education that meets their needs and aspirations. And I think that's a kind of key point, you know, in terms of what the EPA is seeking to do, is to ensuring that education, the provision of education, is open access for all, depending on their individual needs and aspirations. So it involves everything from basic skills right through to vocational training, physical education, cultural education, development, access to higher education, distance learning, everything, you know, and unfortunately, that is not available at the moment. You know, the report undertook a survey across Europe, and we had quite a positive response, with 73% response to the questionnaire, and it demonstrated that many jurisdictions still have a significant journey to attain or to acquire the recommendations on prison education.
Yes, thank you. And also, when it comes to prison education and on the policy level, are there any themes or topics that became more relevant or more upfront in the past few years with the
Yes.
digital transformations and the emphasis on skills?
Absolutely, Thomas. One of the difficulties across Europe is that the education policy is very often it's not consistent in terms of who owns policy. Sometimes, policy for prison education is owned or directed by justice departments across Europe, or it is the responsibility of the education department. Sometimes it's a regional education department, and sometimes, it is the prison service themselves. So there's no real consistency in terms of the policy that is made in respect of education, and consequently, there is a great deal of divergence as to what constitutes education. What can be considered as being legitimate.
Okay, there seems to be a disruption in the connection. I hope we can get James back soon.
Still, yeah, I'll see we're back there. That's okay. Yeah, but the divergence in the policy arena means that there is inconsistencies across Europe about what constitutes education, but moreover about who is entitled to access education and the type of education. Sometimes the only education that people in custody can access is education that would be available in school. So it's school education. It's not based on what European prison education would like to see as an adult education approach, which fundamentally addresses the needs and the aspirations of the individual and tries to provide an education that is critical education. So it looks at issues from a critical perspective, and it involves the individual as part of that dialogue. It's not a passive type of education where the teacher or the educator is, giving information that the learner is absorbing passively. It's an interaction. It's a dialogue. It's a dialectic between the aspirations, building upon where the learner is, what the learner intends to become in the future, and inherently engaging the learner with that, because in some respects you could look at it as a kind of pre-basic skills or a pre-literacy type of education, because as education is a voluntary subject, we have to encourage people to participate. So therefore we have to make education that is interesting, that is stimulating to learners so that they are interested to engage. Otherwise, very often the people in our care have had poor experiences in the past of education, may have a learning difficulty or disability, or had poor experiences at school, and therefore their confidence and their self-esteem has been affected, and they're not quite ready yet to actually undertake that leap in the dark and to engage in education services. So the presentation and the range of activities has to reflect and be able to meet the needs of a wide variety of people across the board, not just in terms of basic skills, but in terms of future employment aspirations, higher education, but more importantly, how they view themselves and how they view, their interaction with society. So very kind of critical links, like Paula Freire, who's a South American educator, very much on that radical type of education.
That's very interesting. It opens up a space for a lot of new types of stakeholders when it comes to providing the training. in prisons, and also a lot of new content, new types of content. In the comment sections, we have a couple of questions regarding the current circumstances caused by COVID. One question is shown in the display. In the current circumstances, what strategies are suggested to address the challenges of basic skills training in prisons?
Yeah.
If you could address that.
Yeah. Given the current situation, Tamas, and I can speak in terms of Scottish prisons, we still have education services being delivered, albeit on a very reduced level due to the restrictions required for physical distancing. However, our teachers, and I'm quite sure teachers across Europe, have been very innovative and engaging and very much concerned about the needs of those in our care who require education, to keep them occupied, to keep them active and to help them fulfil their own individual aspirations. And the way that teachers in Scotland have responded to that has been very innovative, and they have developed a wide range of learning packs, hard copies of learning packs that have been distributed to residential halls, across a whole range of subjects. They've been distributed, they're also collated, feedback is given to the learners. We try to make it as broad and as interesting as possible. We have utilised the media channels like prison radio and TV networks. There have been DVDs developed with educational themes. We have developed podcasts. We have introduced competitions, including art competitions, just to keep people stimulated for those that cannot realistically attend. We've tried to manage the attendance levels as appropriately as possible to ensure equity of access, but that there has been, they say that necessity is a mother of invention, and there certainly has demonstrated that with the range of innovations that have come into being during this particular time. So it's not been an ideal situation, and we look forward to the time when we can return to normal. But I'm quite sure there's other examples across Europe of what individuals, and I'd like to express my thanks at the moment, not only for the teachers in Scotland, but for across Europe for the efforts that they have made during the current crisis.
This is indeed a very challenging situation, but in itself, when we look away a little bit from COVID, what do you think that the current trends that have been going on would require us in general in education policy, but more focused on prison education policy? What could be the next steps to make that reality?
One of the areas that has been fundamental to the updated recommendations, Tamas, has been the use of digital and ICT in prisons. Our survey, which accompanied the report, and I think you're going to put up the link to the report so that people can access it. One of the feedback that came via our survey was that only around half of jurisdictions across Europe actually had access to the internet for prisoners. Mm-hmm. And even where that was available, it was very limited to either white sites or to supervised access, to ensure that the appropriate safeguards were put in place. I think the COVID situation has certainly demonstrated the need and the essential need for jurisdictions to embrace the fact that the digital world is the world in which we live, and if we are serious about providing the necessary forms of education and development for individuals in custody, we have to fully embrace the digital agenda, because as you know, things are moving so quickly in all areas of digital, from stepping onto a bus when people come out after a long service, to access and employment, to family contact, to every single aspect of life is now digitized. So I think COVID has demonstrated that and really pushed that agenda forward. Only this morning, I had a meeting with two of my directors and with the Microsoft agency about how best we can make provision in the future to ensure that the full digital agenda is made available. I can understand the constraints that jurisdictions have, but the technology can provide appropriate safeguards, and it's like everything else in life, is ensuring that they get the right balance between that access to technology, but at the same time, do not lose that interaction with the human face, with the teacher, the interaction, because we know that people learn primarily through engagement and through reflection.
Thank you very much. Yes, we do hope we can move on to this direction in the future as COVID the situation is getting better with this. James, thank you very much for the interesting talk. And now we would like to turn to Maria to address the practical level of skills training in prisons. Maria, could you tell us a bit about the key elements to successful delivery of basic skills programs?
Okay, so in my opinion, there are two key elements, and I'm happy to see that they were already pointed out in the comment section of the discussion, and also James mentioned. The first one refers to re-engaging, difficult to engage, and the distance that prisoners have to education and learning. And then the second one, very important, in fact, for the activity of EBSN, is the pedagogical training of prison educators, or the professionalization of basic skills teachers. So the first thing to do before delivering any basic skills training is to find ways to re-engage prisoners and bring them back into the learning process. And it's important to try to achieve that conscious level of learning in which the learner sees the value of learning, where learning is meaningful to them and they are motivated and empowered to take control of their own learning. We know that adults who have not completed compulsory education and those with lower levels of basic skills, they very often have had negative experiences with school and the idea of education and learning in general. And for prisoners in particular, that distance is even bigger. So not only not having enough education and an adequate level of skills might be the root cause of their condition, but this also might be what brought them to the prison in the first place. So it's very important to do this re-engagement with the learning process before delivering basic skills training. And then we move to the issue of professionalization of basic skills teachers. And just because they are basic, it doesn't mean that basic skills are actually basic to teach. In fact, it's probably one of the most challenging areas of adult teaching. So in our discourse on the initial and continuing professional development of basic skills teachers, we often say that there are two big elements. So they need to master the adult pedagogy, and they also need to have the subject-specific knowledge for teaching those basic skills. But those who teach basic skills to prisoners, they need something in addition to that. So it's not only an understanding of the specific needs and learning context of the prisoners, but also these re-engagement strategies that I am talking about.
Thank you. Yes, it is quite a complex situation for teachers, but also for inmates and learners themselves. And in this context, can you tell us a bit about how can we translate it into practice, all these challenges, and come to a solution on a practical level?
Okay, so already mentioned in the introduction of this discussion, I am going to refer to a project today. It's called EduPris. It's a K3 policy project in which we developed a methodology for working with minors and young offenders with educational challenges. And in very simple ways, we call this methodology a progressive learning pathway for re-engaging minors and young offenders with learning. This methodology addresses not only the learner, but it also provides the educator, the prison educator, who very often does not have a pedagogical background. It provides him or her with the opportunity to enter a professionalization journey into pedagogy. And since we work with young people in custody in this project, we turned the methodology into a board game and tried to conceive it as interactive as possible. In this approach, the learning goes hand in hand with reflection in order to achieve that level of conscious learning that I was talking about. So they start from questioning the idea of learning. So what is learning, for example? And finalize the game as an empowered learner engaged with the process and in position to actually celebrate the learning achieved. So we consider that at this point they are ready to enter a basic skills program or a vocational training or any other educational program. And what I believe it's most innovative to this methodology or game, it's the fact that educators get to play the game hand in hand with the learners. So if the learners hit a double when rolling the dice, then it's the educator's turn to take a challenge in the game. We might be surprised to find out that educated beliefs when it comes to their own learning. So this is just an example of how you can create that re-engagement with learning and develop the appropriate tools for working with minors and young offenders. A board game, an interactive game, might be the best tool, but it's adaptable. The philosophy of this methodology is adaptable to any other categories of adults who are lacking basic skills, and we want them to enter a basic skills training. Um, you can implement this methodology either as a standalone program, as we are doing it in EduPris, or you can embed it in an existing basic skills program, or if you are embedding basic skills into vocational training. So there are many ways of creating this engagement. It's just very important for anyone who develops the policies at the organization level, at the prison level, for example, and the educators that are facilitating learning. It's just to be aware that this is a critical foundation to achieving basic skills.
And it's also worth mentioning that then this engagement section or as a standalone element in prior to basic skills, any other training programs can be made aware in the policy level as well, and in the teacher training programs and all the other things.
Yeah.
You mentioned the shift between this engagement section towards other training programs. Can you tell us something about how we can make that shift more efficient? Are there any good advices to do so?
Well, I think that it's important that you create coherence. So if you are aiming at delivering a specific basic skills training program in the prison, you can simply arrange prior to that a program or a series of activities that are meant to re-engage prisoners with learning. Um, so this is one way of doing it, to make sure that any basic skills program also has this component of re-engagement with learning. And then if we refer to the compulsory education, to school education, to second chance program that prisoners have access to in prison, here it's a matter of training those school teachers who quite often they come from the outside, and they perhaps they don't have the appropriate pedagogical training. So in this discussion of professionalizing basic skills teachers, and especially those who teach basic skills in prison, we first have to ask ourselves, who are they? So who delivers basic skills in the prison? So what type of programs, what type of learning opportunities do we have for prisoners to develop their basic skills, and who are the people who are teaching these basic skills? Because then the approach might be different, and the pathway for training and professionalizing these educators might be different. It will be interesting to look at the, let's say, to have the bigger picture on, how basic skills provision looks like in prison.
That's very interesting. We actually have a comment. Now you were addressing, if I understood well, also the teacher training part to help this shift between the engagement learning programs to basic skills and other training programs. We have a comment considering the curriculum, the content, the learning content, and I was just wondering if related to this comment, this gamified approach of engaging learners can add something to that. The comment says the curriculum should include psychology lessons, as inmates do not have sufficient social skills. They would need classes to learn about themselves, study how to manage situations that are conflicting and stressful, and they should learn how to change and use their positive qualities in freedom. So this approach, do you think this approach can also be addressed by maybe EduPeace or other games that help?
Yes, it can, and it's very important. As I said, adult educators who teach basic skills to prisoners, they need something in addition to just the pedagogy and the knowledge of literacy, numeracy, or ICT skills, or whatever they are teaching. So they also need to master the strategies of re-engaging the prisoners with learning, and they also need to be aware of other very important aspects of teaching to prisoners. And one issue is mental health. It's very important for the teachers who are at any level delivering any type of education to prisoners to be able to recognize mental health issues of prisoners and to provide the adequate care and support to them. And this is so this should definitely be part of a more let's say in extensive training that we can think about for prison educators.
Thank you. Yes. Maria, thank you very much for the interesting thoughts and presentations. And basically now I would turn to my colleagues to see if there are any questions from the comment sections that we could address with James and Maria here. We have a comment. Prison educators should be involved as trainers in order to introduce teachers into a specific penitentiary context or to share best practices. And this is a comment. Well, we addressed teacher training before. Can you name any best practices that occurred in the past that you have met during your time with the EPALE, James?
Yes, I think it's a very relevant question, and Maria touched on it as well. I think it's important to acknowledge that prison education is a unique environment. It's not a school, it's not a college, it's not a university. Yet it's all of these things and more. But it is unique in the sense of the restrictions and the limitations. I was I was very fortunate to undertake research with long-term prisoners a few years ago, and many of them would describe the education centre using words like harbour and haven, and sanctuary, because it was different. It was somewhere where they could relax, where they could be more like themselves, and also it's more important. It's very important to understand that very often prisoners are vulnerable people as well, and to be aware of that, to be aware of the background in institutional care, background in addictions, background with mental health, background with issues of trauma, so the prison educator has to be fundamentally aware of these issues and be able to work around them, and with them, to ensure that they gain the best from the individual. And that's why I mentioned that the more we embrace digital, which is a good thing, we must never forget that human interaction is crucial, to the education process.
Yes, thank you very much. In basic skills, teaching the professionalization of the teachers and the practitioners are in itself an important question. How can we make sure? Are there any examples of professional development courses that you are aware of or you heard of before in prison education, especially?
Yeah, we have actually introduced some of our own, along with our education provider. There is continual professional development of education staff. When new systems come along or when new education opportunities. For example, we introduced a programme about 3 years ago in collaboration with the University of Edinburgh, teaching prisoners in astrobiology. Now, that was really for higher level learners. That particular project developed a number of spin-off activities in creative writing and poetry and artwork, exploring Mars as a concept and how people would survive within that environment. So it developed a lot of issues around leadership, citizenship, democracy. These were the type. And what it did was it got some of the teachers interested. So we ended up with the postgraduate students encouraging the teachers, and the interaction between them was professional development in that particular subject. So it was really about curriculum expansion. We also did that with the cell block science project we had, where science students were coming in and doing experiments within the classroom. It was enabling professional development for the teachers. So that was all good practice. We can't do this on our own. We have to engage with the community. We have to engage with the wider educational institutions, because ultimately prisoners will be being liberated, and they'll be going back to the communities, and we need to prepare them and give them the confidence and the self-esteem to then go to college or university once liberated.
Thank you very much. And now, I would like to thank you, James and Maria, for this very rich and enlightening discussion on also the policy level and the practical level, but we covered beyond that, I believe. As the plan goes, now we would turn on to the comment section. We would continue the online discussion in the comments of this page. So we invite our audience to continue sharing their thoughts, continue posting their questions, and let us discuss further on these topics that were proposed for today. Our moderator will be Maria. Maria will stay with us in the comment section, and I will be also available. The moderation lasts until 4 o'clock Central European time, so feel free to take part in the discussion too. We will post all the resources that were mentioned in this discussion by James and Maria too, so they will be available. James and Maria, thank you very much again for joining us today, and let us continue the discussion in the comment section.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.